Through the midnight fog of the East China Sea glides a vessel unlike any other, its dark green hull emblazoned with massive white crosses that glow against the blackness. The Awa Maru moves in a straight line, where other ships zigzag frantically through these deadly waters. Her route has been filled with American Naval Intelligence, her distinctive markings broadcast a protection guaranteed by both Washington and Tokyo. Official manifests list only medical supplies and relief packages for prisoners of war. Yet at Singapore's docks, witnesses observed a curious scene. After nightfall, heavy wooden crates replaced ordinary cargo, each requiring 6 men to maneuver. Armed guards kept civilian eyes at a distance. She allegedly carries something incredibly secret that the Japanese emperor cannot afford to lose. No one was to dare touch her at sea. Yet now, 16 miles away, an unidentified vessel traveling at warship speed suddenly pings the Awamaru with deadly intent. Closing in fast, it seems like they know a lot more than they're supposed to know. Ready to strike. By 1944, the Pacific Theater was no longer the once chaotic free-for-all it had been only 2 years earlier. Despite the island bastions falling one by one and the Japanese supply lines reaching their breaking point, even in retreat, the Imperial Navy remained dangerous, especially in the shallow waters of the Luzon Strait. On March 11th, the shiny hull of a new fleet submarine slid into the water at Portsmouth, USS Queenfish. A Belau-class hunter, she was swift through deep water, whisper quiet when needed due to her electric motors, and carefully engineered for extended predatory patrols, for which she was armed with 10 torpedo tubes, a 5-inch deck gun, and twin 40mm and 20mm anti-aircraft mounts. After rigorous trials and final combat exercises in Hawaiian waters, Queenfish and her crew of 80 men departed for her first war patrol on August 4th, her orders clear: disrupt Japanese shipping, locate convoys, and sink any foe that came in their path. At the con stood Lieutenant Commander Charles E. Laughlin, who at only 34 years old was one of the youngest commanding officers in the Pacific Submarine Force. The day Queenfish slipped away from the harbor, she joined the 3-boat wolf pack known as Ed's Eradicators, led by Commander E.R. Swinburne, and coordinated from USS Barb, under the leadership of Eugene Fluckey. Rounding out the trio was USS Toonie, which very early in her patrol had no choice but to limp back to safety following an air attack. After prowling the oceans with no success, on the very last day of August, Commander Laughlin spotted a valuable target through the periscope: Awa Maru, a mid-sized tanker running south at steady speed, blissfully unaware she'd been spotted. Everyone on board the submarine moved through her narrow confines, sweat tracing down their necks as orders rippled in short, loud bursts. The crew and their leader carefully aligned the shot, and without any warning, sent a series of torpedoes racing out in sequence, their bubbling wakes marking the path as they drifted rapidly toward their target. Suddenly, the crew heard the thump of impact piercing through the all-metal hull, followed by another, lifting the tanker off her course and sending her listing hard, until within minutes she slipped beneath the waves, and Awamaru was gone. The following week brought more victories to USS Queenfish. On September 9th, the American submarine closed in on a pair of stragglers trailing behind a coastal convoy. That day, the sea was calm, visibility steady, and a duo of ships kept a straight course without escort. The 7,000-ton Toyooka Maru, a passenger cargo vessel filled with troops and equipment bound for the Philippines, and her smaller transport companion, Manchu Maru, just over 3,000 tons. The determined Laughlin waited patiently until the right combination of angle, range, and target movement came, then ordered a full-blown spread from the forward tubes. Within minutes, both were gone. Prisoners of war. By mid-September, Queenfish had done what few boats managed on their first patrol: 3 confirmed sinkings in as many weeks. But the waters ahead were about to offer something much, much rarer: the chance to be a hero. As Queenfish moved toward the final leg of her patrol, new orders came in. A disaster in the South China Sea off the coast of Hainan required their attention. Only days earlier, on September 12th, a duo of Japanese transports, Rakio Maru and Kachidoki Maru, had been attacked and sunk by American submarines, unaware that the vessels carried more than 2,000 Allied prisoners of war, mostly British and Australian soldiers. Following the torpedo strikes, Japanese escorts moved to retrieve only their own sailors, leaving hundreds of the surviving POWs drifting helplessly across the fractured wreckage. Injured and disoriented, they clung to whatever fragments remained afloat. Queenfish joined a small team of submarines in a long and desperate search. For hours, the Americans carefully scanned the horizon for signs of life, lowering rafts, throwing lines, and pulling half-conscious but infinitely grateful men from the surf. In total, Queenfish and her men rescued 127 prisoners of war from the water. Just as one more survivor was hauled aboard, the horizon darkened with the unmistakable signature of a typhoon approaching with gathering force, its outer bands already churning the sea. With no time left for further searches and conditions deteriorating by the minute, the submariners had no choice but to turn away from the debris-filled waters. After nearly 2 months at sea, and a patrol that covered more than 10,000 miles, Queenfish officially headed into Majuro Atoll for a well-needed refit and a respite for her crew. Laughlin's Loopers. For a new boat on her first deployment, USS Queenfish showed the kind of performance that Navy brass was looking for. At the center of it all stood Laughlin, young, composed, and starting to carry the quiet confidence that only comes with victory. By early November, the submarine was once again gliding through Pacific waters, and this time, Laughlin wasn't just heading back out. He was returning as a Wolfpack commander. They called it Laughlin's Loopers, a 3-submarine group consisting of Queenfish, Barb, and Pakuta, sent to patrol the northern reaches of the East China Sea, where Japanese shipping continued moving. Though the second patrol began in much colder and dangerous waters, thick with fog and peppered with minefields, the Loopers retained their dark and dry sense of humor to deal with the enemy, nicknaming their ships Queerfish, Boob, and Peculiar. On November 8th, Queenfish, in command of the trio, spotted freighters Keijo Maru and Hako Maru, moving just south of Kyushu under escort. Commander Laughlin took advantage of a passing squall to conceal their approach, and from under 2,000 yards, he sent a 4-torpedo spread through the ships. One tore through Keijo Maru's midship, and the second found Hako Maru just forward of the stack, sinking both in less than 15 minutes, an attack that was then topped off by USS Barb, taking down an aging nearby cruiser. The following morning, Queenfish hunted alone, intercepting and sinking Chojisan Maru, an older gunboat pressed into transport duty. On the 10th, she pressed in against a larger, heavily defended convoy, firing a quick spread and damaging one vessel before escorts retaliated with a barrage of depth charges. The submarine barely managed to escape by plunging downward. After hours of playing cat and mouse, she surfaced to alert her packmates. Barb intercepted the group and sank one cargo ship, while another nearby Wolfpack, the Urchins, caught and destroyed most of the escaping vessels. Then came flash traffic from Comsub Pack. A major convoy was inbound from Manchuria. Troop ships, freighters, and not one but 2 carriers, all bound for the Philippines. Laughlin's Loopers and the Urchins fanned out, ready to strike. On November 15th, Queenfish made first contact with a Kitsumaru, a 9,200-ton aircraft ferry loaded with expensive planes and personnel. Throughout the afternoon, Queenfish tracked her every move, staying just outside sonar range until the perfect moment came at dusk, and Laughlin sent one torpedo right near the bow and a second aft, sending a Kitsumaru down fast, her escorts dumping charges aimlessly in the melee. Not just yet. Over the next 48 hours, the 2 Wolfpacks worked in unison as they tore through the convoy, sinking 8 more ships together, including a 21,000-ton transport, one of the largest of the war, destroying the majority of an entire division and helping MacArthur's push into the Philippines. Before the month ended, the Loopers and Urchins picked off 4 more stragglers, and finally, on December 4th, after firing nearly every single one of her torpedoes, USS Queenfish turned south for Guam. In total, Queenfish was credited with 4 confirmed sinkings on her second patrol, while the Laughlin Loopers and Urchins tallied no less than 19 ships sunk, totaling over 110,000 tons sent to the bottom of the ocean. These incredible numbers were beyond dispute, and so was the recognition. By the time Laughlin and his men returned to Guam, USS Queenfish had a Presidential Unit citation waiting for her. With every chase, every torpedo, and every victory, Commander Laughlin's confidence grew sharper. And though the numbers were climbing, so was the expectation to be even better. In March 1945, following a third tour that yielded zero results, Queenfish headed out on her fourth patrol. By then, the pace of the war was noticeably shifting, and enemy targets were becoming harder and harder to find. But Laughlin wasn't finished. Not just yet. Through it all, the leader stayed fixated, his eyes bloodshot from hours at the periscope, ignoring exhaustion as he and his men followed vague contacts across the East China Sea. On the night of April 1st, Queenfish received a burst transmission from her packmate, USS Seafox. A convoy had been hit off the Chinese coast, and one ship might have broken away, heading south through the fog. Laughlin didn't wait in order to turn south. He would not let the ship escape. The mystery of the Awamaru. As World War II entered its final and most desperate phase, American leadership grew increasingly concerned about the condition of the thousands of Allied prisoners held across Southeast Asia, especially as Japan's ability to sustain its own was fading fast. Looking for a solution, Washington approached neutral Switzerland with a proposal. The U.S. would deliver 2,000 tons of Red Cross relief supplies, and in return, Japan would be allowed to distribute them using ships granted safe passage under international agreement. Of course, Tokyo accepted quickly. While on paper, these missions aimed to deliver food and medicine, for imperial planners, they offered something far more valuable, a rare chance to move through hostile waters unchallenged. With Japan's empire unraveling and its currency no longer trusted in places like China and Thailand, bullion had quickly replaced paper as the only form of payment worth accepting. Beneath the surface of humanitarian relief, another operation seemed to be taking shape, where crates filled with gold moved cleverly under a flag no submarine was supposed to touch. 2 vessels were chosen for the relief mission. The first, Awamaru, sailed in January on a run to Shanghai and completed the voyage safely, delivering her cargo without issue. The second vessel, Awa Maru, was given a longer, more exposed route. Originally built as a luxury passenger liner, Awa Maru, at just over 11,000 tons, became one of the nation's most important transport ships, making repeated voyages between Japan, Singapore, and Burma, carrying ammunition, troops, and supplies. By 1945, she had sailed thousands of miles under different missions until Tokyo gave her one final set of orders. After unloading her humanitarian cargo in Singapore on March 2nd, Awamaru continued south for additional stops, returning on March 24th. 4 days later, she departed Singapore for Japan, now carrying over 2,000 passengers and a cargo of a very different kind. According to persistent rumors, in addition to medicine, bandages, and other crucial materials, inside her belly were large quantities of gold bullion from occupied territories, platinum ingots, industrial diamonds, and other strategic materials quietly marked for Japan's final desperate war effort. Others whispered connections to the last known location of the fossilized remains of the Peking Man, an irreplaceable scientific treasure that had mysteriously vanished during the chaos of the war. Most intriguing were accounts from dock workers and local observers in Singapore, who later testified to being witnesses to a strange deception unfolding at the docks. During the day, the vessel was loaded with ordinary rice sacks, but as darkness fell, these were replaced by massive wooden crates, each requiring up to 6 men to maneuver and load, and all led under the watchful eyes of armed Japanese guards. Whatever the truth behind these clandestine maneuvers, Awamaru departed Singapore on March 28th, ready to deliver her cargo. Do not engage. Under a formal agreement between Tokyo and Washington, Awamaru's hull was painted a distinctive dark green, with large white crosses emblazoned on her sides and funnels, visual markers meant to be visible even in dim light or fog to make her protected status unmistakable to any passing aircraft or vessel. The United States Navy received the full itinerary of Awamaru's voyage, including her departure from Singapore, her route past Formosa and the Ryukyu Islands, and her expected arrival in Nagasaki by April 4th. In turn, the Navy followed protocol. Instead of encrypting the clearance notice, for over 3 nights in late March, a clear-as-day broadcast identified the ship and instructed all submarines to let her pass without interference. Not all transmissions made it through. When Awamaru sailed, Queenfish was en route from Hawaii to Saipan, pressing through heavy seas. Though the same dispatch was repeated time and again, radio conditions all across the theater were breaking down, causing the critical words from top commanders to be lost to the static. On the 28th, as the submarine patrolled the Taiwan Strait, one final encrypted message went through, quote, "Let pass safely the Awa Maru, carrying prisoner of war supplies. She will be passing through your areas between March 30th and April 4th. She is lighted at night and plastered with white crosses." Though Laughlin read this final message, he didn't think it applied to his ship, as the warning was sent out to every submarine from the Aleutians to Australia, with no coordinates and no reference to any prior transmissions. Without the essential context, to the commander, this was just another encrypted signal, buried among routine traffic. Both vessels quietly moved through the same stretch of sea, on a direct path toward each other. Target spotted. Far out in the darkness of the East China Sea, aboard Queenfish, Laughlin stood in the conning tower, squinting through the lens and waiting for something to materialize. For hours, he and his men had chased sonar whispers and distant bearings, waiting for the lonesome ship he was promised. Right before midnight of April 1st, the radar picked up a contact of one ship, moving at 16 knots, fast enough to suggest a warship. The range stretched to 17,000 yards, the same bracket where Queenfish usually spotted destroyers. The mystery target ran in a straight line, not zigzagging, steaming through waters recently churned by American torpedoes. To Laughlin, it all fit. Whatever it was, it had chosen the wrong sea, the wrong night, the wrong submarine commander. As the geometry favored a stern shot, Laughlin swung Queenfish around, lined up the solution, and gave the order to fire at just 1,200 yards. 4 torpedoes left the tubes in sequence, their propellers spinning to life as they spread across a narrow arc, set for shallow impact. The men counted seconds in their heads, breaths held, muscles tensed. Then came the sound of 4 sharp spaced thumps, each one dull and deep, vibrating through the hull plates like an animal's growl. A few moments later, sonar reported the contact breaking up, metal twisting, and air pockets collapsing under pressure. Then, the radar return blinked twice and disappeared. Whatever they'd hit in the middle of the night was gone. As the men inside the submarine cheered, a victory at last after so many dry weeks, Laughlin allowed himself a small, tight smile. One more warship consigned to the deep, and most importantly, one less threat in the sea. Or so he thought. Awamaru. The fog was still clinging to the water's surface when one of the lookouts spotted a person drifting among the debris, clinging to the wreckage, soaked, silent, and barely responsive. Quickly, the crew hauled him aboard, and once on Queenfish, the questioning began with urgency. Through a translator, the survivor introduced himself as Kantaro Shimoda, a civilian interpreter who told the crew about the ship they had just sunk without mercy. Awa Maru, a Red Cross ship, on her way to deliver supplies for their own beleaguered troops. With this confession, the crew fell silent, and Laughlin felt his stomach tighten as blood drained from his face. Instead of an enemy ship, they'd sunk a vessel they were never supposed to touch. Laughlin didn't delay, drafting a report as fast as his hands allowed him, and relaying the news through encrypted channels to headquarters at Pearl Harbor. From there, it moved with unprecedented speed through the multi-layered naval bureaucracy and directly to the desk of Fleet Admiral Ernest J. King, Commander-in-Chief of the United States Fleet in Washington, D.C. King, notorious for his volcanic temper, slammed his fist down so hard that coffee spilled across operational charts. The enraged leader demanded immediate action, and within minutes, priority transmissions were being encoded and dispatched across the Pacific. Queenfish was to sail to Guam immediately. When the boat surfaced and pulled into Apra Harbor, Vice Admiral Charles A. Lockwood stood waiting on the concrete pier, flanked by a stone-faced contingent of nervous staff officers with clipboards and a military police detail. Once on land, acting on King's direct orders, transmitted from thousands of miles away, Laughlin was told he'd face a court-martial and was relieved of command on the spot. Only weeks before, he'd been hailed as one of the greatest submarine commanders in the world. Now, sailors averted their eyes as the lieutenant commander stepped off the ship, carrying a small canvas bag containing personal effects slung over his shoulder. At his court-martial, despite arguing that intelligence aboard Queenfish justified his decision to fire, Commander Charles Elliott Laughlin was found guilty of negligence, taking the lives of more than 2,000 Japanese. Though Laughlin was removed from command of Queenfish, he was only given a formal letter of admonition as punishment. He continued his naval service and went on to hold senior positions for years. As for the submarine, Queenfish remained active throughout the final weeks of the war, completing her 5th patrol in April 1945. For the next 31 years, Awa Maru lay silent beneath the surface, undisturbed, unmapped, and officially forgotten. Whatever she carried, relief supplies, treasure, or something else entirely, remained at the bottom of the ocean. Until someone went looking. True or not? The story of USS Queenfish versus the helpless Awamaru was certainly one of the most mysterious moments of the war. The ship had been granted safe passage under a Red Cross banner, allegedly carrying humanitarian supplies for Allied POWs, though curiously, the survivor never once mentioned medicine during his extensive debriefing. Perhaps she carried gold, ancient jade artifacts possibly, platinum and industrial diamonds, according to some sources. The estimated values fluctuated wildly, depending on who was telling the story, but the central narrative remained consistent. Something of immense value had supposedly gone down with her, and it had never been recovered. In 1977, Chinese salvage crews claimed to have located the wreck in the Taiwan Strait. They returned with support vessels from Japanese and Soviet oceanographic teams, working the site for nearly a year. The recovery effort allegedly pulled up ordinary items, ceramics, copper ingots, and a scattering of silver coins, but no gold bars. Beijing eventually declared the site exhausted and called off operations with little fanfare. Not long after, an American syndicate, led by John Lindbergh, the famous aviator's son, quietly assembled financing and equipment for its own expedition. But whatever was found or not never entered any official record. Forever, the Awamaru mystery will remain unsolved, her true cargo known only to the dark waters of the Taiwan Strait, where rumors of vast imperial treasure, unlike any other, still draw fortune hunters, conspiracy theorists, and historians alike.